we're going to get started. Anthony, can you hear me in the back? No, you cannot hear us in the back. Is that better or worse? Better? Okay. If at any time you cannot hear us, somebody just raise your hand and let us know, okay? All right, so first we're going to get started. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. This is a great turnout tonight, so thank you guys for coming to the meeting and getting to meet with us. My name is Becky Swigert. I'm the Senior Manager here in Community Development. Before we start tonight, I want to take a moment to remember Dolly Parton and a quote she would always say. And the quote is, "Y'all be nice." So tonight with me, I have Brandon Dunn, who is our planning manager, as well as Adam Mendez, who is the principal planner in our zoning section. And we're going to walk you through kind of our amendments tonight. So I want to kind of talk about what we're going to explain to you. So we're going to go over the lead plan and LDC amendments that the staff has prepared. We ask that you listen to the presentation and be respectful to the staff and those around you. We include comment cards. They were all on the chairs. I'm not sure if they were in the back row, if they got set up, but we have comment cards for everyone in case they need to put in some written questions for us. There's comment boxes, thank you very much, that are on the sides over here so everyone can kind of put their questions in there. We're not taking Q&A during the presentation. Perfect. That's awesome. Yep, that's perfect. We're going to collect all those boxes and all the comments that you guys left. And I ask that you don't interrupt the staff. We're not doing Q&A during the middle of the presentation. And I want to clarify some things we saw on social media. We did put this meeting on our community development website on our calendar on August 14th, and we also advertised in the paper on August 17th. So the meeting, this meeting is not required, but we wanted to do it as a courtesy and to give some education to the public in some explanation. So tonight's agenda is kind of, I guess it'll be basic, but it will help you guys to understand. So we've got the intro, we've got the background of the amendments, the overview of the changes, our takeaways, and our next steps. While we're not seeking the we're seeking only written input tonight, so just want to express that. We're going to put up a frequently asked questions on our website so you can see them. That way we'll be able to keep up and everyone will be able to read them as well. Because you may not have a question that somebody else did and you can relate to it. There will be multiple times for public involvement, and I'm going to stress this a lot tonight, but there will be multiple times. We've got the local planning agency, we've got for our the Lee County Land Development Code amendments, those will go to 2 committees as well as the local planning agency. Those committees are the Executive Regulatory Oversight Committee as well as the Land Development Code Advisory Committee. Those will both be on our website. Those dates and meeting times will be established on our calendar with agenda for the backup. So you'll be able to have that information. And then there'll also be 2 board meetings, a board transmittal as well as a board adoption hearing. So there will be, it's at least 5 meetings for public input throughout the process. But I just kind of want to stress that the Executive Regulatory Oversight Committee and LDCAC, the Land Development Code Advisory Committee, will focus on the Land Development Code amendments. They won't be focusing as much on the plan. So just to kind of give you the background of it, on April 1st, 2025, the board gave staff the direction to amend the LEAP plan and corresponding Land Development Code amendments. And those amendments are to support the LEAP plan amendments that we're doing. The direction from the board was to increase efficiency, remove unnecessary regulations, meet statutory requirements while protecting public health, safety, and welfare. One day I'll learn to talk about that. So just some kind of quick facts for everyone, because I think it's kind of cool that we had a LEAP plan back in 1979, and that at the time when we established it, it didn't have any future land use categories. Then in 1984, when we put one together, it had 17 future land use categories. Today we have 29 of them. So, and then in 1985 is when the state of Florida put together the Growth Management Act, and our 1984 plan was outdated by then. So it's important to keep the plan relevant and up to date with current statutes and changing conditions. So our goal tonight is to help improve clarity and consistency. The goals of the amendments create predictability for everyone. It improves the county's ability to plan for infrastructure and safety needs, and it maintains the protections of public health, safety, and welfare of the residents. It's important to remember that the LEED plan is still a broad protection that remain in place. So the LEED plan, this is what the LEED plan currently looks like if you were to print it out today. We are only amending one element in this plan tonight. Like, this is the one thing, it's one element. We still have the transportation element, the community facilities element. We have Parks and Rec open space element. We have a conservation and coastal element. We have a capital improvements element. We have a historic preservation element. We have an intergovernmental coordination element. So there are still several elements in there that include protection measures that will keep some of the things that you guys are saying we're losing. They'll still be in those other elements. So, and those elements go for road network, transportation, water, sewer, water quality, air quality. It covers park facilities, distribution of park facilities, solid waste needs, coastal areas and their protections, species, shoreline areas, housing needs. So there's a lot of that's still in the plan that I kind of want to remind you, you might want to look at the plan in totality as well. Then my second exhibit, this booster seat is the actual land development code. And this is one chapter that was amended, it's chapter 34. But there are still multiple chapters in here for building services, floodplain management, development standard regulations, the zoning, historic preservation. These are still elements or requirements of the plan today. So I just kind of want to put that in perspective. These amendments that are you've seen is one element of the LEED plan, one chapter of 34 that then where we had to make changes in 34, it ripples into the other sections. So I just kind of want to give you that perspective that it's only the future land use element and the chapter 34 that the ones that have been proposed for amendments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Randy.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Dunn. I'm the manager of the long-range planning section at the Department of Community Development for the county. Thank you. I'll try to speak louder. I'll hold the mic a little bit closer. That should help. I'm going to provide an overview of the amendments we did. But before I do that, I want to talk about how these amendments were created and the staff that was involved in the creation of these amendments. The staff that created these amendments is very experienced in drafting, reviewing, defending, implementing both the LEED plan and the land development code. Staff included past and present zoning manager, past and present planning manager, regulatory review and permitting manager, senior manager, the department director, and also staff of the Lee County Attorney's Office. So these amendments were considered by all implementing portions of the department and as well as the county attorney's office. So first thing I want to talk about is Chapter 163. That's the section of the state statutes that provides us with the comprehensive planning requirements for local and municipal comprehensive plans. It requires certain elements to be within the LEED plan or a local comprehensive plan. Those include the future land use element, transportation element, water, sewer, solid waste. We combine conservation and coastal management into one element in Lee County, but we have that. Recreation and open space, intergovernmental coordination, capital improvements, property rights. Those are all other elements of the LEED plan. Tonight we're here to talk about the future land use element, and because that's where the changes are focused today. So what does the future land use element do? The future land use element identifies density, intensity, distribution of uses, and also identifies strategies for the orderly and balanced development of the county. Another way to think about this is they are supposed to show how the county will coordinate the availability of facilities and services to accommodate the projected population as determined by the state of Florida. Additional requirements include ensuring compatibility with natural resources and historic resources, as well as compatibility, protection of compatibility. The Lee Plan, as I mentioned, has two main documents. Those are Lee County has two main documents that govern our development. Those are the Lee Plan and the Land Development Code. The Lee Plan is the policy document. That's where the board tells us how they want to implement or how they want to grow. The Land Development Code is the implementing document, which provides specific standards and regulations that are followed. These amendments in part do involve removing the community plan goals from the Lee Plan and Chapter 33 from the Land Development Code. Staff used our experience and implementation of these documents to ensure that important provisions were retained by combining requirements of future land use categories. That includes the Rural Community Preserve in Buckingham. There are certain requirements of that land use category to have minimum lot size. Those are retained and moved to the future land use category. That future land use category also moved requirements for clustering requirements that had minimum project size and lot size for clustering requirements. Those were retained as part of the Rural Community Preserve future land use category. Another example of this is the coastal rural future land use category in Pine Island. There were provisions within Goal 24 that addressed, that were specific and spoke directly to the coastal rural future land use category. Those policies were relocated to the coastal rural future land use category so we can continue to implement them, and the future land use category, the coastal rural future land use category will continue to be implemented as it is today. And that includes a restriction of adjusted maximum density, or the ability to increase density within the coastal high hazard area. That protection is being moved to the future land use category and out of Goal 24, but it is remaining. Some other things we did is we combined, another one of those is the new community in for Babcock in the North Olga area. We also put applicable requirements in the same place. For that, we're talking about if there were similar requirements or requirements that were more appropriate within the conservation coastal management element, we moved those there. This will simplify review and make these requirements easily identifiable. It ensures consistent application of these requirements, and it removes ambiguities or potential loopholes. I've been using codes for 25 years now, both here in Lee County and in the county prior to this, implementing both local and federal codes. And in my experience, longer documents often say less than short documents. Longer documents have loopholes, they have exceptions. So sometimes the policies that you think are protections might not be the protections that you think they are. We're also removing duplicative language. As I mentioned, there are specific elements or policies or even whole elements about infrastructure and services, transportation, natural resources, environmental protections, and we are also removing outdated language. Some examples of that include there are some policies within the community plan areas that continue to rely on concurrency requirements from the state. The state no longer has mandatory concurrency requirements, and those cause issues. When the county is prohibited from building roads, but we can't stop development, it causes traffic issues. We're trying to address that. Elsewhere in the plan, there are overly detailed requirements for areas that have been built out. And those include areas for like bookstore or university community. And then we are also implementing language to the LDC. And Adams will talk a bit more about that.
Testing in the back. Hear me all right? Thanks, Brandon. Again, I'm Adam Mendez. I work in the zoning section. I'm a principal planner. I primarily work in the land development code. So far, what you've heard is the planning document we all know is the Lee County Comprehensive Plan. The land development code is known as the implementing tool. Housed in there is Chapter 34, where I find myself commonly. There's also Chapter 33, Chapters 10, 14. These all collectively are the development regulations that actually implement those policies that are in the comprehensive plan. So as part of this amendment, you're going to see the consolidation of regulations where duplicate regulations exist. Some of the exercise we're going through is identifying areas where you have multiple places in the land development code that address the same thing. So if I'm a landowner in Lee County and I'm looking for clear information on how model homes are regulated or something of that nature, I shouldn't have to look at multiple chapters to identify those regulations. So you'll see through this exercise and through this presentation some examples where we have taken the opportunity to take regulations from other chapters, implement them in the chapters that regulate that same subject. So it's a more intuitive document reading it through. Some of the additional things I want to address in this is kind of how they work together. And so as Brandon outlined, densities, intensities, and countywide planning policies, our Chapter 34 zoning regulations is going to address things like minimum lot size, setbacks, building heights, lot coverage. These are development regulations. You will find procedures for public hearings, administrative actions, the criteria to render decisions based on those actions. Site design requirements that generally boil down to civil engineering review. And those all materialize into a parcel-specific implementation of the LEED plan, and across all of those chapters. So the reorganization and update that we are pursuing, that really you can put it into 4 categories, and we have them listed on the screen here. We're consolidating regulations, again, where they overlap or essentially say the same thing, and we're putting them in the chapter or section that regulates that content. We're relocating provisions where those provisions don't exist in the zoning chapter, so these are zoning regulations, but they exist in Chapter 33. They're being relocated where applicable, where the county has determined that they are up to date and that they are implemented. We're updating, clarifying procedures, terminology, where there's a great effort to find cross-references that are out of date and bring them up into current codification. And the big one, and this really pairs back the code by, it almost seems like a quarter of Chapter 34 is a lot of its duplicate language that doesn't really house regulations. It has philosophies in it, but it doesn't get you to exactly, if I'm reading the LDC, to identify, well, what can I do on my property, and if I can't do it on my property, what's the process for me to submit an application to obtain that use? Where are those cross-references? So we've spent a lot of time removing duplication. So as you read through the local planning agency staff report, which I highly recommend, it's a 16-page staff report, does a great job of explaining what's going on here. You'll notice through these documents, you'll notice a lot of the language and stricken, and you'll see that the staff notes above each of those sections give some ideas to what the purpose of the stricken language is, or the added language, or the relocated language as we get into further in this presentation. We'll clarify that. And so with that, I'll hand this back over to Brandon.
The intent of this is making the plan clearer, simpler, easier to use, without changing how much the development is allowed within the county. What does removing ambiguities mean? I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Landscaping requirements across the county, and depending on where you're arguing within certain communities, can be vastly different. If you're in mixed-use overlay or not in mixed-use overlay, that's an area of the county that allows for more intense development in high acres or more Fort Myers. But the landscaping requirements can be vastly different, and a lot of times we end up getting questions as simple as that make it all the way up to the managers for every single time, and that's not how a code should work. We shouldn't have to get involved in every single question about landscaping. That should be relatively simple. Another good example is clustering, right? For North Olga, policy 29.2.1 encourages clustering and a mix of unit types to promote rural character. I'm not here to say if that's a good thing or not, but that's what the code says, and that's what we have to implement, and that's what we have to defend in court. So if that's not what we mean, what are we working to protect here? If clustering isn't the type of rule that we want, then why is it in the plan? Again, every decision should not have to come to one of the people that are here presenting today to come up with a decision. The LDC and the LEED plan must be easier to interpret and implement. And that includes by the public. The public should be able to pick up this document and understand what it means. The LEAP plan, the future land use element, has a future land use element map series. That includes the future land use map. The future land use map identifies the location of future land use categories, which provide densities and densities, and the distribution of uses across the county. And again, there are no changes to the proposed future land use map or the densities and intensities of those future land use categories. We are not proposing any text amendments to the future land use categories. Environmental compatibility and infrastructure and public safety requirements will remain in the LEAP plan and land development code and will apply to all areas of unincorporated Lee County. And again, I want to go back to the slide on 163. That's a requirement of state statutes as well. So we can't get rid of that. The Board of County Commissioners can't get rid of those protections. They are required by state statute. Talk a little bit about population growth and growth coordination. The table at the left shows the various communities within Lee County that have a community plan area and the years that those community plans were adopted and the population of the county at the time that those were adopted. A lot's changed since those community plans were first adopted. The county population has obviously changed. Our economy and our environment are continuing to evolve. The county must be able to plan for necessary infrastructure and services, including public safety, on a countywide basis. Part of the comprehensive planning is planning for the required infrastructure for the expected population based on what the state tells us it's going to be. And my experience over the past 20 years is they're generally pretty right. They get the numbers right when they give us population. And we fail to plan for what our expected population is. Staff also identified some strategies that have been effective for redevelopment of older areas and residential properties that could be approved or expanded. When you see support redevelopment, what we're talking about here, or some examples of what we're talking about here, are the Lehigh Acres commercial overlay, or the commercial overlay court, and the North Fort Myers commercial corridor. Those are both provisions that we would be required to retain, whether the board wanted to or not, because they are protected by Senate Bill 180 right now, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But they've also been effective and helpful at redeveloping these areas. So we are wanting to expand their applicability. We're not deleting the commercial overlay for North Fork for Lehigh Acres. We are moving it to Map 1D, which has wider applicability and could be used by other areas of the county in the future if that's something they wanted to do. For upgrading housing, right now we have a policy or a provision in the LEAP plan that we call, the redevelopment or the build back policy. It's like a pre-disaster build back. It allows overdensity multifamily homes that were built prior to 1984 to come in and request to rebuild at that same density they had previously had without worrying about losing units. We are going to expand that policy. That policy actually went into place in the years that followed Hurricane Charlie. You probably remember that. Hurricane Charlie at the time was a big storm. 15 years later, I think that's about right, we had Hurricane Ian, which was a storm on a different scale, and we learned some things from Ian. One of the things we learned from Ian is it's not just multifamily projects that might want to redevelop and keep that density. It might be mobile home parks, it might be single-family developments. But we're expanding Objective 5.2 to allow any residential property to redevelop at the density that they were approved at. They were approved prior to the 1984 LEAP plan. And we're doing that to encourage people to, the county doesn't want to be the one that's stopping people from redeveloping and moving into safer structures, code compliant with elevated structure. Another example, this isn't necessarily part of these amendments, but it's something I did want to point out. You can see the little brown splotches kind of in the southeast area of the county on here. These were actually this is the existing acres subdivision. These have previously been on map 2D within the community plan area and was available only to properties in southeast Lee County. You may have heard that we are also looking at amendments to Southeast Lee County right now, and as part of those amendments, we took the existing acreage subdivisions and put them on map 1D. We envisioned this could be a way to protect rural areas in the future in other areas of the county. I've had conversations with people about identifying strategies to protect rural areas that don't involve clustering, that don't involve a suburban form of development. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're not adding any new properties to it at this time, but we are moving it to a map that has wider applicability. One of the board's directions was, make sure you stay consistent with state and federal requirements. As I mentioned previously, Chapter 163 provides what our state requirements are for comprehensive planning. These involve coordinating development with available facilities and services, identifying distribution of uses, densities, and intensities, and continuing to protect natural and historic resources as well as ensure compatibility. We are doing that through these amendments. I also mentioned Senate Bill 180 briefly. That is a bill that Lee County, that's a Senate bill that followed Hurricane Ian and the storms last year, Helene and Milton. If a county was identified in any of the disaster declarations for those storms, we are not allowed to make the code, the plan, either the Lee plan or the land development code more burdensome, provide additional restrictions until October 1st, 2027. So we have through these amendments made sure that we are remaining in compliance with that. Based on the amendments that I've discussed, there are also amendments to the transportation element, the conservation and coastal management element, the historic element, the administration element, and the glossary. We've deleted maps. Those include the maps that were part of the community plan series, the map 2s. And we've deleted maps that are no longer necessary or required. There were some transportation maps that included they weren't really maps, they were plans for some roads that weren't really appropriate in the plan, and we're removing them. There are some, and then there were some other maps that were just moved to the appropriate map series, and there's a couple of maps that got moved to the conservation coastal management.
On the screen before you, you have 3 real-world examples that I'm going to try to illustrate for you. There are several in the amendments document as a whole. But what I'm going to pull from here is development standards in Matlacha. Currently, in the Crows subdivision, the Cellular subdivisions in Matlacha, there are supplemental regulations that govern setbacks for those lots, given their size, given their age, and their dynamic on a canal. If I'm reading Chapter 34 today, and I'm looking at their underlying zoning, I'm going to arrive at a completely different location when I try to identify those setbacks. Whether I'm a building contractor, I'm a homeowner. You'll have to go flip to Chapter 33 to find those regulations that supplement Chapter 34. And so, as part of this exercise, we're taking those regulations to ensure that we're not creating nonconformities. And we're going to house those in Chapter 34 where zoning regulations are housed. That's an example where regulations are relocated. There's several, in those buckets I described earlier, there's several examples. They're all a little bit different, but they all serve the same objective, and that's putting land development regulations in the document that actually governs that type of development. And so the second example I have is in Lehigh Acres, which has supplemental regulations or special regulations for model homes. It allows for model homes that are built on arterial roads or collector roads to be used for certain non-residential uses without going through a full rezoning. Staff looks at that and says that that's something that makes sense across the county. It's modified in the document before you, but the idea is that a model home only has a certain lifetime in county regulations. 3 to 5 years depending on the approval process. After that, it reverts back to a single family. It usually ends up with a single family that's on a 3-lane expanded arterial road like Lee Boulevard. So that's an example of a regulation that we're consolidating into Chapter 34, moving from Chapter 33. So we should be clear here that Chapter 33 is being eliminated as a standalone chapter. Regulations that are retained in Chapter 33 or modified are being implemented into Chapter 34 and other chapters that regulate that content. North Fort Myers Commercial Corridor is my last example. These are regulations that establish different use and property development regulations for properties on the primary roads here in North Fort Myers, Pondella, Pine Island, Bayshore. And so those regulations supersede the underlying zoning district, and I can't tell you how many times that has been misinterpreted and missed and created issues across the spectrum. We find it more appropriate and logical to put that regulation into Chapter 34 in its appropriate location, so it's looked at in a logical location. And those are collectively the three examples I have. And again, you can look through this document to find other examples. So as a whole, this presentation is really supposed to hit on these points, that there is not any increase in densities and intensities with these amendments. Those densities and intensities are going to be governed by the future land use category, their existing zoning. The protections are retained. That is part of the board's direction, and we aimed to make sure that was upheld. Improved predictability is consolidating these regulations, clarifying them, and updating them to flow in the development standards that they actually belong in. And then regulatory consistency, ensuring that they're all consistent with state and federal, which is, again, a motion made by the board. So with that, I will hand it back to Brandon.
We do encourage you to read the staff report and the attachments that were provided. Just to help understand what the attachments are, the underlined text is newer added language. Struck out text is shown with strike through. Double underlined text it means something has been relocated to a new location. And in order to preserve context, you may see double underlined text that is also struck through. That is just to show you where it came from and to show you that the context didn't change through the deletion of certain portions of that. And then both documents, there's a document for the LDC and a document for the lead land. They both include staff notes in red with those documents. And we encourage you to read both the staff report and those documents to understand the changes that are being made. We are having a hearing for this on Monday. We'll be at the local planning agency. We'll be discussing both the lead plan amendments and the LDC amendments at that hearing. A hearing after that, we are expecting a transmittal hearing in front of the Board of County Commissioners. I don't have an exact date yet, but just to let you know, and so we're being upfront, the soonest that could be, and it could possibly be on September 16th.
So we are available. We have some of the questions we've seen online, so we'd like to go ahead and start trying to address some of them. So Kate Burgess with our planning section her and I were going to be reading the questions and giving some answers to that. So one of the first ones I want to start with that we saw a lot was, how will agricultural and equestrian lifestyles be retained? And we aren't changing anything to our agricultural zoning districts. There's no substantive changes happening in our non-urban future land use categories. So just to kind of put that out there for you guys.
So one of the questions that we got from someone in the room was related to data centers. There is one future land use category that explicitly allows data centers. It is something that we had looked to strike, which means to get rid of. However, with Senate Bill 180, we are not allowed to make anything more burdensome, so that's something that we have to keep until that no longer applies. So there's only one, it's trade port future land use category. It's the only one that explicitly allows it, and at this point, we can't do anything to stop them, or stop it there. Trade port is generally located around the airport. Oh, yeah, RSW. RSW. One of the other questions we got from the room was, will the new land use plan eliminate the community overlays like Lehigh, Pine Island, so on and so forth? The community plan areas are eliminated, however, there are numerous overlays that are within the community plan areas that are staying. So the commercial overlay for Lehigh has been retained, all of the coastal rural stuff has been retained, all of the rural community preserves has also been retained. So there's quite a few of those like overlays where the allowances have been retained in the draft. And they're all moving on. Another one from the room was how will 2020 lands be impacted by this? The proposed amendments do absolutely nothing to 2020 lands. All of those requirements and everything are being preserved. And then the last one that I have, and I'm going to give it to Becky, is has the county completed an analysis of how the additional development potentially allowed by these changes could affect roads, traffic congestion, drainage, flooding, hurricane evacuation, schools, emergency services, water, and sewer infrastructure? So all of the proposed amendments, well, I suppose a better way to word that is none of the proposed amendments propose any additional allowances. So all of those things will not be impacted. Any applications that we get in that would be for a future land use change or a zoning change or something along those lines would have to go through the standard process to be approved, where staff will evaluate all of those infrastructure needs based off of the project. So I'm going to give it to Becky.
Thanks, Kate. So a few more that we heard online that I just kind of want to go over is, are there provisions for green space and wildlife corridors? And the answer is yes. We still have the conservation and coastal management element, which includes a lot of those features and requirements. So that would still be remaining. And then how will this change affect public information meetings? So applicants will be no longer required to hold a public information meeting, but applicants may still choose to engage the public. A lot of times the applicant wants to hear from the public. Y'all be nice. Y'all be nice. Y'all be nice. So, and applicants may choose to still participate in the public forum and ask questions of the community and understand what their concerns may be with the project. And then, how do I participate in the input moving forward? And again, I'm going to stress to you that we have the upcoming local planning agency meeting on August 31st, and then we will have a potential board date in September for a transmittal. There will be two. We don't know the second date yet. The state will be reviewing that. Then we also will have the Land Development Code Advisory Committee, as well as our Executive Regulatory Committee meeting that we will be having. You guys will be able to participate in those. And back on this screen is the QR code that will take you to our calendar, and our calendar will be updated to keep you apprised of all of those future meeting dates and upcoming either public hearing or meeting dates for you. So with that, we've kind of come to the end of our presentation. I encourage you all to, as Brandon said, please read the staff report, and it will help you better understand some of this. I hope tonight's presentation